Thank you, Chairman. I just want to pin into focus that in the last 2 sittings, Madam Auditor General mentioned that there was a directive from Cabinet instructing the Auditor General to conduct the audit of the farm work program in Canada. Member Sibley's, I recalled, questioned the veracity of the Cabinet instructing the Auditor General, a creature of the Constitution, in her methodology. Member Sibley's went further to state that this is against auditing standards not to rotate your auditors. And Chairman, you read into the records the response of both the Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and that of Cabinet. In the interest of clarity, can we pursue discussions so as to close out on this issue? Because Madam Auditor General, right, she has put forward, right, her statement that there was a directive. Member Sibley's questioned along that line. We have now received the response from both the Ministry of Labor and Social Security and that from Cabinet, and there seems to be variance in the responses. So, Madam Auditor General, and with the pursuit of the question, Member Sibley's, the committee is just interested in clarifying what happened. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As indicated at the last meeting, I shared that I had sight at some point in time, and I believe it was 2008, because at that time I sought to determine the basis of the audit. And I had sight of a document that spoke to the audit of the Canadian Farm Work Program by the Auditor General. Hansard should record that I said it's either a decision or a document, a letter or somewhat. I can't say definitively what it was, but I can say that I tried in earnest to locate the document. We have not been able to find our closed permanent file, the file on which we believe it may exist. As it pertains, so I am unable to find the document, yes? And Member Sibley's actually spoke about that directive, and I agree with him. He spoke about the fact that it would be ultra-vires, the Constitution, not his word, but mine, for the Auditor General to be following a directive. And so I have to say that I cannot say for certainty that the language used was directive, but rather a request to undertake the audit on an annual basis. So let me make that clear. In fact, Mr. Chairman, I have made a decision, read the annual audits of the Canadian Farm Work Program. I'll not announce that decision here. I will communicate it first to the accounting officer with responsibility for that. Member Sibley's went further to speak to the requirements of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Jamaica for there to be rotation of auditors. I never responded because he said something that I was not aware of, but I have been able to confirm that there is no such requirement set out in the bylaws of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Jamaica. There is a requirement for under the Public Accountancy Board that has responsibility to regulate the accountants in Jamaica for there's no requirement for there to be audit firm rotation. Let me make that clear. ICAJ or the PAB, but there is a requirement by the PAB for there to be audit partner rotation. There's no requirement for there to be audit team rotation, and that is significant because the Auditor General there's no partner to rotate with. So there's no requirement for the firm for itself. But moreover, and I know that Member Holness being a member of ICAJ would also know that sovereign will always trump the local accounting standards. So even though the accounting standards or the PAB may say that there should be audit partner rotation, the fact is that the Constitution places that responsibility on the Auditor General to actually audit the accounts, whichever accounts he or she deems fit. So that particular provision would not apply to the Auditor General. And you can understand the logical argument. It would mean that after 5 years, the Auditor General cannot audit the accounts of any ministry, department, or agency. So it is the same principle that applies. But I agree with what Member Sibley's has said. And in fact, what he has said conflates with the decisions that I have made with many other public bodies, where the act of that public body does not specifically require the Auditor General to undertake the audit. And I mean that there are provisions for some public bodies that require the minister with responsibility to actually approve the appointment of an audit firm. In many instances, what I have done is request the entities to outsource the audit. One, to remove that responsibility and the pressure on the resources. And so I am taking a similar move. I've made Secretary of the Ministry of Labour and Social Security.
Member Holness and then Member Sibley's.
I can almost hear you subtly, even though you're not saying what your decision is, looking back at your physically being present in auditing the Canadian Farmer Program and looking at an external auditor vis-a-vis not necessarily if in your wisdom, having done the audit yourself over the years as Auditor General, number one, have come to the conclusion that whatever necessitated at the time that you gave direct attention is no longer of concern, but you do believe that it is more cost-effective and it is still better control and maintenance within the government of having members from the Auditor General's office still going to take a look at the audit, if annually if necessary, and at some point in time, if you decide every 3 years or if you just spring it on them, you go at points in time as the head of the organization to take a look at what is happening with the Canadian Farmer Program. That I hope is something you would consider and not necessarily move to outsourcing through external auditors if it is not the most cost-effective thing to do.
Let me add, Member Holness, that henceforth I will proceed with the audit of the Canadian Farmer Program under Section 122 of the Constitution. There are two elements to that audit. That's the financial statements, and there's a compliance audit element. Certainly, the Auditor General's Department will continue to maintain an interest in the Canadian Farmer Program. My considerations are as it relates to the audit of the financial statements.
Member Sibley's.
Madam Auditor General, good morning. I believe you have misquoted me. I, at no point, had said that the ICAJ, what I said is that the ICAJ, in discussion with public entities, there was a discussion where the ICAJ was having discussion because the government had said that audit firms should be rotated. And I went further to say it was once taken to be 5 years, and then they said 7 years. The substance of what I was saying was not that the Auditor General Department should not audit the Farmer Program. The substance of what I was saying is that based on what you had said with regards to the directive or the request for the Auditor General to do the audit his or herself, right? I was saying to you, the staff, your senior members of staff, because you also pointed it out that the person who accompanied you to do the audit been accompanying you for 3 years, and prior to that person, it was a person who was accompanying the previous Auditor General until he retired. And that is where I said, other senior members, to rotate, to have one set of staff doing it, right, goes against the grain. That's what I said. That's what I meant.
Okay, I understand
okay?
what you're saying.
So I'm not in no way asking the Auditor General to rotate the Auditor General department to be rotated. And if that is what came out, I am totally against that. That is not what, because it would not be cost effective at all for any government or any entity to go that route. So I am with you agreeing with me as it relates to the principle of having staff rotated. And I accept the correspondence of both the Cabinet Secretary and the Permanent Secretary, but I am more pleased that we have come to a position that the team will be rotated.
We didn't come to that position.
We didn't?
No, we didn't.
I'm hoping.
I'm hoping. We didn't come to that. Right, because what I sought to do was to clarify what you say, that the provision that you relied on actually does not have a requirement for audit team rotation. It has a requirement for audit partner rotation, which the partner cannot be signed because I'm a member of the audit team, so I cannot be rotated. Okay, thanks. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Member Sibley's. Members, I want to, in the interest of time, Member Holness.
Member Sibley's, in terms of private audits / audit of even listed companies, the idea of rotating the senior partner or the partner on the job is to ensure that there is, over time, no building up of relationships that cause collusion. So that is really the concept behind it. But the audit team itself, which the Madam AG's office would be doing in the same way, the documentation of the processes used, if another Auditor General comes and takes over, they would be able to see how the audit was executed, what the findings are, and it would not be expected that Madam Auditor General or anybody in the said position would be developing a relationship with any particular permanent secretary, ministry, agency, or department to the point where one could not trust in the integrity of the work being executed. So by the Constitution itself and how the Auditor General's department was established, it is established with the understanding that the Auditor General would not be rotated and would be mandated to audit certain agencies, certain ministries, certain departments of government.
Okay, thank you, Member, and I get your point solidly. But I need to reinforce here that, and you would know that as well, that the audit partner is required to sign off on the financial statements. That's the responsibility of the audit partner. So if you rotate the audit partner, it means that that audit partner cannot sign off on the financial statements. That responsibility cannot be rotated away from me. There's no senior officer under the FAA Act that can sign off on the right.
All right, thank you, members. I want to go back now to the internal audit that was done by the Ministry of Finance. Members, if there are questions, we started last week. I know there were outstanding questions related to the audit, so I'll invite the members if they have any questions on the internal audit to Member Sibley's.
I just wish to close out the matter of the business continuity, just to bring a closure to that point. And it is our belief that business continuity plan is important in an organization. And we have seen where the Auditor General's department have audited other entities and have touched on the area of business continuity. and the lot thereof. And in fact, the Jamaica Custom Agency was recently, in 2019, was audited by the Auditor General and found that there was some shortcoming as it relates to the business continuity plan. And when I looked at it, it seemed similar to what to some extent, what the Chief Internal Auditor was saying about business continuity plan in some respect. The thing that one of the areas, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the Auditor General said I take an approach of agility where the department must be able to respond at all times when there are changes happening around us. There is no requirement in government for us to have a business continuity plan. That, Chair, is a little bit troubling because MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies may see that as an area that if the Auditor General come to audit that area, then they would be able to say, the Auditor General said that there is no requirement in government for us to have a business continuity plan. And so with that, I just want to say that the Auditor General's department, in doing its audit of the business continuity plan, is interested reading. And she has struck, Madam Auditor General, you have struck the right chord with the Jamaica Custom Agency in your recommendations, and therefore as it relates to a business continuity plan. I don't have an issue if a department, like the Auditor General Department, might not have their business continuity plan in place. What I'm saying is that it may come down to credibility in terms of the ministry, department, agency quoting when you go to do an audit to say that there is no requirement in government for us to have a business continuity plan. I want to therefore go to the question, because you had said that you're going to put in the business continuity plan. Can you tell us by when we would have the business continuity? Do you foresee the business continuity plan being implemented?
One second, Madam AG. Member Morrison has a related question, so I'll allow her to ask, and then you can just answer both.
Yes, in support of Member Sibley's, but also in support of something that Madam Auditor General mentioned, because when she spoke about the agility, I was so impressed with that word. She spoke about taking an agile approach, which I interpreted to mean being responsive, being dynamic, paying attention to the situation as may arise, taking initiative, etc., etc. What I am interested in hearing your framing and pinning is how, going forward, this can be considered as a template, the agility, the responsiveness in the business continuity plan. So it doesn't mean that if you're going to take that approach, again, I'm going to use the word, the agile approach, the one where you work on initiative, the one where you are dynamic, it does not mean that one does not have a business continuity plan, because that can merge into set plan to make it robust. Okay. Thank you, Madam AG.
Thank you. I'll respond to both. And Chairman, I'm really happy for the parallel that Member Sibley's has drawn. It's important that MDAs listening to this committee have a firm understanding of what the audit requirement is and what the entities are, their responsibility. I'm going to ask my Deputy Auditor General, Marlon McAdam, to speak shortly about that audit of Jamaica Customs. And I have several IT audits, Mr. Chairman, and I know that for Jamaica Customs, we spoke about business continuity planning. When we develop the criteria that we are going to engage in undertaking the audit, we are looking at the systems that are in place. So if a criteria is set for business continuity plan, it means that the entity had in place a business continuity plan. Not that the Auditor General is saying, because there's no criteria within government, that we, to meet and to satisfy our interest, you have to have a document that says business continuity plan. But what we expect to see are a number of processes and policies that will constitute proper business continuity planning. So I'll ask my deputy to speak to that shortly. And emanating from that discussion, clearly I am now going to go back to examine a number of documents that I know speak to this. And of course, what I actually reviewed was the international standard ISO 22301 to see, what is said, because there's still some amount of, you'll hear different opinions based on who you speak to in terms of what should really exist. But it is expected that we will have all the systems in place that will support a business continuity in the event that there is a disaster. The question asked is, when are we going to institute this plan? I would have indicated to you some time ago, 2 weeks ago, if it is the decision that we must have a document that says business continuity plan, well, we're going to engage someone to actually codify what we have and actually comment on the gaps that exist currently and which is the best way that we should capture that from. I will not hesitate, Mr. Chairman, to share my concern about having a document that says business continuity. That's not what we aim to achieve. What I need every member of the Auditor General's Department to understand is what the steps that they're taking on a daily basis, how that is embedded in our processes, and to ensure that in the event of a disaster, we can recover well. I'm not convinced that having it in one document is the best way to do it. What is important is that it is clearly communicated, it is captured, and all members of the department are attuned to their role in the business continuity. But where our processes fall short, well, clearly we have to ensure that the gap is filled. I hope that answers your question, Member Morrison. Thank you. Member Siblings, are you satisfied?
It's not about the question that I asked really goes to, I want the Auditor General Department to maintain their credibility and to be able to go to ministries, departments, and agencies to do their audits as it relates to business continuity. And that is why I bring together all the points. And so I am, as long as we don't find ourselves in this place when other ministries, departments, and agency gets here, they are proffering a reason, and that was really my concern.
I understand perfectly well what you're saying. And Member Holness used a term that is oft repeated in the department in a phrase. And you spoke about beyond reproach. My colleagues and every member of the department can, I think without hesitation, repeat that term that I inherited. That the Auditor General, as a member of the Auditor General's Department, you have to be like Caesar's wife, beyond reproach. But remember, I sit before you to say that there's nobody that is infallible. And so I am not sitting beside the individuals when they are carrying out the daily transactions of the organization. So I cannot say that errors will not be made. What I can say is that when those errors are made and identified, I am going to ensure that steps are taken to address those errors and to implement measures that I believe can help in preventing and mitigating any weaknesses that may occur. I'm going to ask my Deputy Auditor General to speak very quickly to the issue of Jamaica Customs Agency and why I'm asking him to do so. This matter too, Mr. Chairman, which I guess at the end, in terms of question from Minister Auditor General, that is a matter that I also want to be discussed, because I don't want any permanent secretary to take comfort in these issues. When a permanent secretary signs that instrument, there is nowhere there that tells them that they must watch what is happening at the Corporate Service Division of the Auditor General's Department. Everybody has to answer for themselves, right? It's every man for himself and God for all of us. So nobody should come here with any comfort that because it happened at the Auditor General's Department, it is okay for me to do it. So, Mr. Chairman, all these questions which were posed were actually provided last year. The Minister of Finance tabled them at the Standing Finance Committee. My responses were not presented directly to the Minister of Finance in relation to the renovation. They were presented through the internal auditor. So I anticipate that the internal auditor would have tested the veracity of the information that I provided. And so what I believe the approach that should be taken is also a public document. In addition to submitting it to the internal auditor, I also sent it to the Speaker of the House, which I'm told that it was tabled. I just need confirmation. So it is for public record. What I would anticipate is that we would review the responses, because the questions aren't different. The substance of the responses are there. And then I would be asked questions in relation to where I fell short, if it is assumed that I fell short, Mr. Chairman. But I agree with the question raised by Member Sibley's, and I agree with what Member Holness said, because I do not want any permanent secretary to take comfort that because the Auditor General became before the Public Accounts Committee, then there are things that we can get away with. No, Mr. Chairman. Everybody will have to stand on their own. I have no problem providing any questions here, and I provided any answers to questions here. And if I fall short, then I need to be told so. It's my responsibility to look back and to review what I have done. But I'm acutely aware, Member Holness, that department, it's an awesome responsibility that I have told the members of the department about over and over. And in fact, let me state, I am actually happy that this has happened, because no person's looking on can say that it's not miserable, she's miserable. But they see what will happen when we make the even minuteness of an error. So I'll ask my deputies to speak, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Mr. McAdam. And just to say, based on the response, the Ministry of Finance has asked for some additional time, and we expect to get those responses maybe next week or the week after, in relation to the relocation questions. Mr. McAdam.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Now, let me say, Member Sibley's, there is really very little risk of a credibility issue arising in relation to when we audit and the matter of business continuity arises specifically. Because at no point in time have we ever imposed a requirement for an MDA to have a business continuity plan. So if you look at the most two recent audits that we conducted in relation to business continuity, we looked at the TAJ and we looked at Jamaica Customs. In both cases, the issue in relation to business continuity was the inadequacy of their business continuity management, right? The first one in relation to TAJ, it was against the background of a system disruption, which resulted in a loss of time, a loss of operations. And they had a draft plan in place, however, the plan was not implemented. And therefore, the issue was raised that if the plan was implemented, the impact would have been minimized. Jamaica Customs, they had a draft plan in place. That plan was in draft for approximately 17 months and was not implemented. So therefore, the issues in relation to business continuity, the fact of the matter is, as the AG indicated, there is no requirement in government to have it. What we have highlighted in those cases is where, based on our risk analysis and what the MDAs themselves have in place, we have said to them, look, you have this in place, however, you have not implemented it. And because you have not implemented it, this is the likely outcome, or this is what would have happened. So that would have been the context within which we would have raised the issue of business continuity and business continuity management.
One question, and very often when the rest of the public takes a look at our meetings, if we're not careful, we are way over many persons' head in terms of what we are actually discussing. So I get it very clearly. There is no requirement or compulsion that you must have a business continuity plan in place. However, there are requirements that several processes are established for you to be in a position to mitigate against the risk of possible failure, of your system shutting off, or hackers, whatever the case may be, that you're able to recover quickly and you're up and moving. One wonders though, and I equally understand why you're saying you may not have codified it, but you do have robust processes in place in terms of how the Auditor General's office would be able to comfortably continue on in the event that you had issues, because you have done your own internal self-assessment. The question is though, if you visit in doing your operational audits, ministries, agencies, or departments that have not even documented or said that this is how they would recover, do you go through that process as well of identifying where they have serious weaknesses or gaps, where they possibly may need to do documentation, and set up procedures and guidelines by which to follow?
Hold on, Member Williams had a question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam AG, my question in relation to the business continuity plan is this. Wouldn't it be very helpful if your department or the responsible agency wouldn't be helpful for them to provide guidance and some guidelines in the form of a circular, or it could take a particular form to the respective MDAs for them to be aware of the importance of BCP and how they should go about it. And I would even take it a step further, since it appears to be such a critical component of audit reports and it has featured prominently. Then do you think now is the time for us then to move towards codification to really make it a requirement? That was my thought.
Yeah. Yes, thanks for that.
Yeah, go ahead, AG, and then when you're finished, Member Sibley's. If you could just answer the questions from the two members.
Right. So the responsible for codification would be that of the Ministry of Finance. Ms. Hope Blake is here. Of course, you can understand that my responsibility is just to review. Right.
An agency, because I wasn't too sure whether you would have the jurisdiction to do that.
And I do believe that it is timely, because we have more business processes of government being automated, and that is why. And in fact, when we speak about business continuity plan, it's in the context of our IT audits that we speak to business continuity plan, not in the general regulatory or compliance audit. So it is an area that the Ministry of Finance, I guess, could take some interest in.
Ms. Blake? No, hold on. Ms. Blake from the Ministry of Finance.
Right. Just to make members know that the enterprise risk management policy of the that was issued by the Ministry of Finance in 2019, issued 2020. There are guidelines, so it recommends the business continuity plan. There are guidelines that will now have to be developed along that line, as you suggested.
Thank you, Ms. Blair. Member Sibley's.
Thank you, Chair. To you, Chair, and to the Auditor General, to our Deputy. I don't know if this is the report that you're reading from or you're looking at. But in this report, it said, what should be done? And this is from the Auditor General. And
can just reference what that
it's
report
the
is?
Jamaica Customs Agency, the audit of the Jamaica Customs Agency. 2019, my research have informed me, correct? Mm-hmm. Right. What should be done? There's many what should be done. My pages are not numbered. Okay? But one of the what should be done states, management should adopt a framework to guide the structured development of agencies' business continuity plan and IT disaster recovery plan. Full stop. The point I'm making is the Auditor General has recommended a business continuity plan. And so too, the Chief Internal Auditor has recommended a business continuity plan. I am saying, in quoting the Auditor General in what she had said, what I had said earlier, Chairman, that the government of Jamaica, there is no policy, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm not quoting her now. I am saying one has to be careful, which the Auditor General agrees, and the Auditor General even went further, and I agree with her, that ministries, departments, and agencies should never take 100%, because we as the PAC members, all of us, including the chairman, is going to hold the ministry, the department, and the agency accountable, because we have to, for the citizens of this country. But in essence, I was just saying, we shouldn't say, I never feel comfortable. I felt comfortable in the fact that you will, you said you will put it in place, and all of us fail from time, because as the head of a division or a unit or a department, we are not necessarily going to know what is happening with our directors or not happening. But we ought to, and so we are held accountable. So it is here, and I was commending you. I was just commending you in doing this audit. And I read it, and I find no fault with this audit. I concur with you and join you in the recommendation. And I hope the Jamaica Customs Agency has implemented or in the process of implementing. So that's all I was saying. I never really was questioning what you do when you do your business, your audit of IT. No, I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't go there. Thank you.
Mr. Makadam.
Yes, Member Sibley's, it's very important to understand context, and the context within which the BCP recommendation came to the Auditor General's department was as if it's a requirement. That is how the internal auditor presented it to us, as if it is a requirement. I am saying to you, in relation to the audits that we have done, we have not made it out to be a requirement for those MDAs. in relation to the MDAs where we highlight the issue of business continuity, they would have had their plans in place. These plans would have been in draft. However, they have not implemented those plans. And that is the context within which we have to understand the issue of business continuity.
Thank you. I think that is clear, and I think the members are clear on that issue. Can we move on? Are there, in terms of the internal audit report, are there other questions arising from the internal audit report?
Chair,
yes,
the previous meetings, you started point by point. You were going point by point.
So we would have finished.
And so we now finish the business continuity.
So we can go to the next point, which is 3.0. So are there questions related to 3.1, Information Systems Backup Policy?
Chair, we would be finished with the whole IT concept.
Okay, let's go to procurement.
I'm very, very, very satisfied with the fact that the auditor is asked.
Can we move to procurement, which is 4.0? You have questions on that?
Yes, Chair, I have
okay,
question on
go ahead.
Just a minute, Chair. Let me get the auditor's report. And the Auditor General has responded to that as well. Okay, here it is. Okay, thank you. As the Deputy Auditor General said, everything is in a context. So I'm going to take this in a context as well. In the context that procurement in our not too distant past had been a very serious concern of the governments and various stakeholders of Jamaica. The government of Jamaica developed the procurement guidelines. In fact, I read up to guidelines up to 2008. Up to 2008, there are procurement guidelines. In fact, it was elevated to circulars, which the Chief Internal Auditor pointed out in his audit. And finally, all of these were codified, Chair, into the Procurement Act. And I'm not stating the name verbatim. And therefore, it is with this backdrop, these guidelines, the Auditor General's Department have done audit, and rightfully so, bring attention to where there's breaches in the guideline. So when I read the findings with regards to the procurement, as it relates to not having a procurement personnel in the Auditor General's Department, I was concerned. But what was even more concerning for me, Madam Auditor General, is that the human resource manager was given the responsibility. Let me read what you have said, because I don't want to misquote at all, because your response, I crave your indulgence, Chair.
Is this page 15 where it says there's an officer currently charged with managing the procurement function? Is
Yes.
that what you're looking for?
Yes, Chair, but the Auditor General had also submitted some other documents to us, which was tabled here. Page 7. Yes. It reads, there was no established post for procurement prior to 2019. However, the responsibility were assigned to the acting director, HRM, who received training from the International Procurement Institute up to level 4. What is concerning, Madam AG, is that a member of the accounting department, it is said that a member of the accounting department prepare the purchase order, okay? And a deputy auditor general signs, same. There is no mention in all of that process what this person that is assigned the responsibility, the procurement responsibility. All that is mentioned is the accounting officer preparing it, which my understanding of the wanting a procurement personnel is the mystery of not having persons from the accounting department involved at the start who initiate and complete the process, because he's in the accounting department, right? I'm not saying that this accounting officer completed it, but the accounting, this person's in the accounting department. The guideline speaks to really having someone independent, really. The intention is to remove so that you don't have such closeness. And more so, the person never signed it. If you prepare a document, one expects you to sign as preparing. The person who prepares, anybody who goes and reviews should know who prepares the document. The fact that it is a Deputy Auditor General who signs it, there's something amiss there. And that is what I would like you to explain.
Thank you. Thank you, Member Siblings, for that question. So, Mr. Chairman, at some point in time in 2018, I don't remember the exact month, the regulations for the Public Procurement Act those were passed. That gave effect to a requirement to have a procurement unit. At the passing of the act, however, there would have been no established post for a procurement officer. The ministry did it, I think, on an incremental basis, where they advised ministries, departments, and agencies. I don't know how they determined the size of the unit, but they advised all MDAs of the numbers that would have been approved for that. And when I say numbers, I'm speaking about human resources. On March 8th of 2019, we received a letter from the Ministry of Finance indicating that 2 positions have been approved and will be added to the establishment for the Auditor General's Department in relation to a procurement unit. This is March 2019. Now, when that letter would have been submitted to us, that is close to the year end, so we would not have had any provisions in our budget to go ahead with the recruitment. Also, when we submitted our budget for 2019-2020, we would not have taken that into consideration because our budget would have been submitted from November 2019. So having received this instruction from the ministry, we now have to, 1, ensure that we have the budgetary provision, 2, make the request by the monthly cash flow request, And 3, ensure that we have the accommodation, the space in-house to accommodate an additional officer. So we would have made the cash flow request now come April 2019. Having been comforted by the Ministry of Finance that we are going to provide the funding to support the position, we went to market May 2019 for the recruitment process. The first, we advertised, and I believe the response to that recruitment exercise would have been June 2019. The audit started in July. So when the audit started, there would have been evidence that we have commenced the recruitment process, and we did so in a timely manner. We advised the auditor we had to go back to market 3 times. You just don't employ anyone just for the sake of employment. You need to ensure that you are employing the right competence. And the first 2 rotations of recruitment did not yield the result. We engaged someone in the last process, and that person was actually brought on February 2020, before we actually the exit interview, or before we provided our responses to the exit interview, and we advised the internal auditor as such that we have recruited someone. No, I need that to be understood, because the impression that could be formed is that the Auditor General is acting contrary to the Act. The internal auditor actually indicated as well that he reviewed the procurement activities and found, I'm getting to that, member siblings, I'm getting to your concern. He reviewed the procurement activities and found no breaches. No. The process that we had, you are correct, that we not having a requirement to have a procurement officer, we identified, and this is years before, so this is not just upon when the internal auditor did the review, we needed someone who would manage the procurement process. We have a procurement committee. It is the procurement officer that would generate the procurement. It is the procurement officer, well, we call that individual procurement officer at the point in time, that would initiate. We did not ask the procurement officer to actually write the purchase order because we wanted to separate it. We actually wanted to separate it. So the person who generated it in the accounts department is not a part of the process. After that person generates a purchase order, it is sent to a deputy. Now, that's not a requirement. Mr. Chairman, let me just add as well. The procurement manual sets out clearly the thresholds that officer within the organization can initiate procurement without going to the procurement committee. I make it a requirement, even if it's a pencil that is being bought, it must go through the procurement committee. And so what I've instituted is another layer. I have a deputy AG that looks at the purchase order to assess the item that is being purchased, to determine, one, if it is a matter that is needed in the organization, to determine the quantities. And I can tell you that there are many occasions where the purchase item is actually challenged. And we have had changes, or we have, before it gets to the procurement, that level, Mr. Chairman. So I get what you are saying. With the engagement of the procurement officer, that function was immediately transferred to the procurement officer, and the internal auditor was also advised of such.
So Madam AG, you are, thanks for your response and for explaining the way that you have explained. But the concern I had, and I had no difficulty in the fact that you implemented a workaround per se, of assigning it to someone, and the person was trained. It's just that I never saw the person who was trained to do it involved in the process. And that it to have, now that you have a personnel officer, and that personnel officer is doing the procurement. I expected that the person we had assigned and had trained to do the procurement process. So the difficulty I had was that an accounting officer, accounting clerk, initiate, because one,
that's a misunderstanding.
Maybe it's based on how you had written the document.
No, it is the procurement officer who is trained that managed the process. It's
so
just the purchase order.
So you would be withdrawing what you would have written here, because what you had written here kind of say that the accounting person, and that is. And I think that is what the Chief Internal Auditor, Mr. Dillon, had picked up on to say that persons who prepared the document didn't sign it or so on. And in essence, that is where I had you can see where I would have a difficulty.
The substance of the internal auditor's findings is that we did not have the procurement officer in place at the time of the audit. And we explained why we did not have the procurement officer in place. Because we had the internal audit started July. We got the advice from the ministry March 2019, and we showed where we had taken action, Mr. Chairman. And I want to say that whatever measures that we take that may appear contradictory, all the measures are meant to strengthen the control mechanism of the department.
All right, Member Williams and then Member Morrison.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Madam AG, on this procurement issue, what troubles me and the concern I have is I am reading from the findings of the internal auditor. And he seems to base his findings in a contravention of the general provisions of the Government of Jamaica Handbook for Public Sector Procurement, as well as Ministry of Finance Circular number 36, dated November 9, 2012. Now, that is quite some time ago. Now, you seem to, Madam Attorney General, I understand.
Auditor General.
Sorry, Auditor General, my bad. I've prefaced your management response to the Procurement Act, which came into being 2018. So it would seem to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, that your response is really pegged. You are sprung into action based on the Procurement Act of 2018. But what I am looking at before me is an audit report that speaks to these two guidelines, the Jamaica Handbook for Public Sector Procurement and the Ministry of Finance Circular number 36, section 3.5, dated November 9, 2012. And this is what it states. It says the procurement unit is solely entrusted with the responsibility of the preparation of purchase orders, seeking all the necessary approvals and issuing purchase orders to vendors. And it continues. Now, in my mind, this would have preceded the Procurement Act of 2018 and its ensuing regulations. So the question I would like to ask, and following up on Member Sibley's observations regarding the procurement, my question would be, Madam Auditor General, now, you have my research has shown that you would have audited other ministries, even prior to 2018, other departments and agencies. of government as part of your constituted mandate. And it is reasonable to infer that you are very knowledgeable of the government procurement process, and you must have been knowledgeable of these guidelines, the handbook and the Ministry of Finance circular. So can you explain to me, and well, to the committee, my apologies, and by extension, the people of Jamaica, why did it take your department so long from the time of this circular, dated November 9, 2012, prescribing the guidelines, to some approximately 7 years after to comply and to really formalize a procurement unit or a procurement officer?
All right. Mr. Chairman, there's a portion of that answer that needs to be addressed by the internal auditor, but I'll just make reference to what I said earlier. Though the procurement guidelines existed before then, the regulations to give effect to the establishment of a procurement unit was passed in 2018. The ministry advised MDAs on an incremental basis of the human resource for that unit that was approved. We received our letter from the Ministry of Finance with respect to the establishment of a procurement unit March 2019. I will hand over to the internal auditor, Mr. Chairman, so that he can explain why he actually referenced these two documents.
So, Dylan?
So the question the answer to that question is just referring back to what we quoted. We made reference to the Government of Jamaica Handbook and the Ministry of Finance Circular 2012. And these would be the criteria that would have been established for our audit that would be applicable to the areas and the years that we were looking at. So the handbook speaks to the procuring entity and the establishment of that said entity and the staffing. And the handbook would be applicable to the situation that we looked at. Now, with respect to the response that the Auditor General gave, we, at the time, understood that the finding was within a certain context. And the Auditor General explained the whole issue of timing, the whole issue of recruitment, and the challenges that exist with respect to getting a suitable person for those positions. Notwithstanding, based on the period that we looked at, those systems were not in place. And what is important is the plan of action that the Auditor General has highlighted, and whether or not we are at a point now of filling that position to ensure that there is compliance.
And you were, well, the appropriate question, having gotten the response from the Auditor General in terms of the procurement of the relevant officer, has it satisfied you in terms of that the Auditor General's department has taken the appropriate action to deal with the issue?
They have, but I believe the department is still having an issue with recruitment of the director, and I mean, this is an area that has to be dealt with, so this is still an outstanding area that has to be addressed. But again, there are some realities that the Auditor General had indicated, and the question is, how will this be resolved? And that is the filling of the director post.
So just so I'm clear, an officer was recruited, but there's still the absence, you say, of a director, and that still is a concern of yours?
Because it is a requirement.
Okay. No, Madam Auditor General?
Mr. Chairman, there's a requirement for there to be a procurement unit. There is a member in that unit. There is no requirement under the Act to have somebody called the Director of Procurement. The Ministry of Finance, the Ministry, and I said in my opening remarks on this matter that I don't know how the Ministry informs itself to determine how many members. Some entities are given 5. I know we were given 2. What is outstanding, we have gone to market for Director of Procurement since last year as well. We have not been able to find a suitable person to fill that position, and we have gone to market again. So we are now waiting to fill that position.
Madam Auditor General, if you're of the view that you do not need 2 individuals in the establishment, because I would presume that the Ministry of Finance estimated based on the type of organization, level of transactions, the volume and values of transactions, and then came up with the numbers they would want to put in place. Would you be at liberty, would it be allowed for you to make a justification that this is what we need at the AG's office, 1 individual who does so? I'm not sure if that is a possibility, instead of being in a long-term position of trying to fill a position you may not necessarily need.
It is something that we've given consideration to, and we can have dialogue with the Ministry of Finance. The Auditor General's department really does not engage in a lot of procurement activities, and usually when we have procurement of a significant value, we normally engage another government entity to assist us. For example, with the IT, we collaborate with eGov, who would help us with specifications, etc., because it's normally of a specialist nature. So it is a discussion I can have with but as you would have heard the internal auditor say, it is an outstanding issue, the fact that we have not filled that position. But certainly I'd be happy to have a discussion with the Ministry of Finance on that.
Member Morrison and then Member Miller. You're satisfied? Member Miller? You're satisfied? Okay.
Yes, sir, Chair. On a different topic, I'd like to ask a question.
Procurement first. All right, go ahead, Member Holness. Are there any other questions on procurement? Member Clark, I see you have your mic on. All right. Well, if there are no more questions, can we move to 4.1? Are there questions on purchase order? 4.2, contract service level agreements.
Chair, just for 4.1, with regards to, I want to quickly ask the Auditor General if they have put in measures, controls in place to prevent duplication. I think there was something about some duplications, or can you just explain, because it was just not so clear what the finding.
So the auditor did not identify any duplication. This matter that the auditor reported on is an automated process from the generation of the purchase order to the payment. Now, there is a challenge that we have at times, and that is the information provided by the supplier. The information is already inputted in the system, and of course, it is actually the payment. Right, they have to provide TRN, but there are other information that needs to be provided as well, and that is captured by the Treasury Accountant General's Department, who actually makes the payment on behalf of the department. What you find sometimes is that at the point of executing the payment to the supplier, the transaction is rejected because the supplier may have provided details that differ from what was provided before. So when it is rejected, the entire transaction has to be voided. It is voided on the system, and you basically have to start over to re-enter the details. In this particular situation, what the audit would have found is it is voided on the system, and that's the reason why you cannot have a duplication. But you have to reprint the payment voucher and the accompanying purchase order. The purchase order, the initial purchase order, we just didn't mutilate it. You should have just drawn a X across it. And that happened on, they identified that on 2 occasions. But because the system is automated and the controls are built in the system, you would not have an issue of duplication. So it's really just, it's a process that is automated that needs to be followed up with a manual thing, just to put an X across it. And that was it, member siblings. Well, all they have to do is to ensure
that is necessary, Madam AG, because if the automated system prevents you from duplicating payment, that is controls that prevent duplication of payments is what needs to be vigorously determined to be working properly. And then you would be able to rely on the system not putting an X across the purchase order.
But the system, you know, so it doesn't matter. Once you, it don't matter how many
use the mic. Use the mic, Madam.
Yeah, I was just saying to member siblings that it's captured in the system, so it doesn't matter how many years you go back. When you search for that transaction item on the system, it's going to show you that it is voided.
I think the issue member siblings may have is wondering if the purchase order that was voided, if it has actually made its way to a supplier. I think that's really the crux of the concern, whether or not a voided purchase order could have physically made its way to a supplier, putting the government in a position where it has a liability out there that could later on be claimed.
And the essence of it is, because that's a purchase order, in the system, it is voided. I understand that. But literally, that purchase order, okay? And a purchase order is a contract, eh? Or something that can be used. And even the same supplier, if they get hold of that purchase order, it's a contract.
Yes, but we don't make
manual so that
payments.
Is why I'm saying if anyone, that's why I can understand the auditor saying that the manual putting, as you have mentioned, putting a line across, just like putting a line across a check.
That would be a risk if we made manual payments. We do not make manual payments. So to effect payment to that purchase order, you'd have to re-enter the purchase order details, and the system is going to reject it because it's already voided on the system. So we don't draw checks at the Auditor General's department. All payments are made through the central treasury management system. And in that system, it's already voided.
But
internal auditor.
So what we have happening, member wholeness, and I think this is something for the Ministry of Finance to look at, we are transitioning from a manual system to an automated system. So even though the process is now automated, the instructions that govern the system is still a little behind. It does not take into consideration that this system is automated and the controls that it is speaking to are inbuilt into the system. And I would think that when the Ministry of Finance reviews the instruction in its next iteration, it will take into consideration that this process is automated. And so what you're doing is you have a requirement that is really a duplication of effort. That's really what it is. But the control is in the system to prevent the duplication of payment.
Mr. Dillon, you would have been here in the conversation. Are you satisfied based on the explanation and the response from the Auditor General's department?
I am satisfied to the extent where I believe a confirmation will have to be obtained regarding whether or not the system will bounce
an invoice if it was already, and a purchase order if it was already entered.
And you're saying you have not, you would need that to satisfy yourself, that it would bounce it.
Right.
I suspect the internal auditor would have to test whether or not that is the case, but I am quite comfortable with the explanation of Madam Auditor General. It makes absolute sense. Once the controls are automated, and it is obvious even from the findings that there were no duplication of payments, then it would be easy to take up one transaction and test the veracity of the system in seeing if it will bounce. And you would now be able to close off on repeating that as a query and updating the Ministry of Finance in terms of adjusting the procedures to allow for updated automated systems.
Right.
I think we can.
Can we move to 4.2? Are there questions on contract service level agreements? All right, can we go to 5.0, travel allowance? Any questions on that? Yes, I see Member Miller and then Member Clark.
Thanks, Sir Chair. I'm just looking at this aspect of the report, travel allowance, and I'm reading the findings of the Chief Internal Auditor, the Minister, Sir Dillons. And I'd like to, through you, Chair, to ask Sir Dillons a few questions. According to the findings that you have here on the report, explain according to the FAA Act, what are the requirements of a travel register? Why is it important to have a proper travel register? And what are the implications if one is not done according to the FAA Act?
Okay, so the requirements under the FAA Act with respect to the travel register primarily requires that an accounting officer has a vehicle or has permission to use another person's vehicle. The travel register should capture that information, vehicle documents in relation to the vehicle, to include licenses, etc. Another component of the register is it should be...
Point of order, Chair. Can the Chief Internal Auditor tell us what is this, etc., etc.? The license, okay. What else is required? Can you just let us...
License and registration. The post number of the person should be included because only approved personnel should be in receipt of a travel allowance. Driver's license information.
Continue, Mr. Dillon, continue.
Right. So the travel register, it is really a control mechanism that was designed to facilitate and to ensure that only personnel in approved posts receive the traveling officer. They are receiving the travel allowance at the rate, the applicable rate that is prescribed. The relevant correspondence in relation to travel allowance speaks to motor vehicle documents being up to date. And so essentially, the maintenance of the travel register will mitigate the risk of overpayments, erroneous payment, and in general, those are the two main risks that the travel register is meant to address.
Yes, Member Miller, you have a follow-up.
All right, thank you for that clarity on the travel registry. May I ask Madam AG, in terms of the findings, what we have observed from the clarity that was given on the registry according to the FA Act, I'd like to ask Madam AG, what has your department done since the findings to ensure that we have a proper registry?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that question, Member Miller. Chairman, I just want to direct you to a letter sent by the internal auditor. I think it was referenced in the first meeting, dated May 3rd, 2021. As it pertains to the travel register, the internal auditor said the IAU, which is the Internal Audit Unit, is in agreement that the AUGD management response was not accurately represented, and the actual management response was that the AUGD does have a travel register, which is maintained using an Excel spreadsheet. The register was subsequently sent electronically to Ms. Suzette Hamilton for her scrutiny. My only correction there, Mr. Chairman, is that the register was not sent subsequently, but was sent along with the response to the internal auditor's report in February of 2020.
All right,
So we
thank you.
do maintain a register in the format. However, what we did not do, and then again, it is the instructions, and I can't tell you the basis for that, but we kept, every year, we established a new register. The instruction says that it must be continuous. So what we have to do is just to add, to cut and paste all the Excel spreadsheets, so we have that continuous record of it.
So it's fair to say, Madam, that something something was there already and has been continuing, according to what you're saying.
Yes.
So if I might ask the internal auditor, the ministry, are you satisfied with the process that has been implemented thus far? Because it seems fair to me.
Yes, we are satisfied.
All right, Member Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Madam AG. Auditor General, sorry. Are you now saying that the ability of the department is in a position to manage the risk, all the risks that comes with a situation of that nature?
And you're speaking specific to the travel register? Yes, Member Clerk, we've had a travel register since 2015.
Through to Internal Auditor, Mr. Dillon, you are comfortable with what? Since you have gone back, if you have gone back any at all, are you comfortable with what is in place?
We have not gone back as yet, but the responses, that is the actions that management indicated, were satisfactory.
All right, thank you, members. Can we move to 6 points? Oh, you have a question, Member Sibley?
Chair, just to quickly ask the Auditor General, in our response, management response, on page 11 of the additional, where the Auditor General stated, however, we noted that the chassis and engine numbers were not captured, but we will ensure that the register is so maintained, and actually that is now being done.
Yes, that was not a findings of the internal auditor, but when I reviewed it, I recognized that this information was missing, and I was just pointing out that we saw that weakness, and we ensure that the information is captured going forward.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Moving on now to 6.0, expenditures. Any questions on that? Okay, Member Sibley's.
Chair, through you to the Chief Internal Auditor, I would like the Chief Internal Auditor to explain to us where he has said the audit found 38 instances totaling $864,000 in which supporting documents for payment were not signed or stamped, that the service was satisfactorily rendered as required by financial instructions. Can you just explain that to us, along with your second bullet point that said that 59 instances totaling approximately 1.1 million in which supporting documents for payment were not signed or stamped approved for payment? Because I'm seeing the Auditor General's response, and I'm just wondering if there is some sort of misunderstanding between the Auditor General and the Chief Internal Auditor, and would like that clarification before we can understand what is happening. So, Chief Internal Auditor, and then maybe the Auditor General can explain. Thank you.
So, this is really a compliance issue, and our references to the 38 instances in which supporting documents for payment were not signed or stamped. This is with respect to the physical documentation. And similarly to bullet point number 2, where we indicated that there were 59 instances in which supporting documents were not signed or stamped approved for payment. Again, we are referring to the physical documentation. And the criteria that we use for this particular area is the FA Act instruction, section 5.9.1, which says payment voucher, where appropriate, attached to the payment voucher must be a signed statement by the relevant officer indicating that the service specified has been satisfactorily performed or goods received in good condition. Section 5.91 says payment voucher, this supporting bills / invoice claims should be rubber stamp paid, and its correctness must be certified by an authorized officer. So it is a compliance issue.
Okay, so member, this is somewhat similar to what I spoke to earlier, a system that is automated, where the certification, the approval is done on the system. What the internal auditor is speaking to is that when he looked at the physical documentation in some instances, he did not see, and I think there is a difference in the nomenclature. What the instruction says specifically is that you need to use the term services satisfactorily rendered, where we have signed to say approved for payment, which is in essence is capturing that. But because it doesn't say that, the internal auditor said we have to say services satisfactorily rendered because it is what the instructions require, very specific language. And this is why the response speaks to the nomenclature, and that we will ensure that going forward we say specifically. And I have gotten myself caught in that recently, where I was asked by the ministry to sign, giving them permission to make payment. And I responded to say approved for payment. And I received an email to say, no, Madam AG, you need to say service satisfactorily rendered. And I guess that is to ensure that it's captured as such for the records. So it's really a nomenclature.
But it's kind of a little bit more than that, because you can approve for payment and not satisfied. You know?
No, because you approve for payment when the service is delivered.
Yes, but persons can write approve for payment. The persons, I can recall some instances where there were persons, not your audit, there were persons, head of entities and head of department who the goods never reached and they never saw the goods, and they signed approved for payment. I'm not saying that is in your situation, but I'm saying why I can understand the government putting that particular rule to say satisfied service, because payment were being made based on heads of entity writing approve for payment, but they weren't checking the person who would have received the goods to say that it was satisfied. And so in writing satisfied service, it would have put the person right on the spot to say that they were indeed satisfied.
I hear what you're saying.
So that is why
yes, I hear what you're saying, but you're not supposed to say approved for payment if you have not checked that the goods have been delivered or the services have been rendered satisfactorily. Yes, you can't approve something for payment without ensuring that the service, because that means you're signing blindly. No, but even to say that that means to say that it is satisfactory rendered, you're not going to address that issue, you know, because some people, they're just signing, you know, with a particular. So I think those that have the responsibility to sign must understand what they are signing to, whichever language they use.
All right, members, can we move on to item 7, the cashier function? Are there any questions on that? Okay. Let us move to item 8, bank reconciliation controls. Questions on that? Number 9, payment, payroll, and annual returns. All right, Member Sibley, go ahead.
Madam AG, can you just explain what could have caused, what was the control weaknesses that could have caused these overpayments and differences in what should be paid?
Right. So what the internal auditor highlighted was a case of 3 officers. I believe in 2 instances, 2 of the 3 instances, there are persons who separated from the organization. One instance, the person, I think their separation date was up to the 5th of the month, and in error they were the 6th of the month, and in error they were paid for that day. They should not have been paid for that day. In another instance, the individual who was paid would have had no pay leave that was not taken into consideration, and that is a matter of timing. So at the end of every month, the officers are required to submit, which is a monthly absentee and leave form that sets out the absenteeism for their unit. In this instance, the person was paid before that form was submitted, and when the form was submitted, it was recognized that there was a day that was not taken into consideration. So going forward, Mr. Chairman, the instructions that I have given, normally agencies will take sometimes up to 3 months to make that final payment to ensure that all the returns are made. We tend to want to pay the officers the moment they're going through the door, and that will just have to stop. We will just have to delay those payments to ensure that all relevant matters are taken into consideration.
All right, Member Holness, one second. Member Holness, then Member Witter.
Madam Auditor General, quite in agreement for such an approach to be taken. I was wondering if you had a mechanism of doing dual checks as well. Some organizations have the HR officer being competent and capable to do a separate calculation of the final payments to be made to an employee who is exiting, and also have that employee sign off on those final payments, so that if they have queries to say, look, I didn't get my no paid leave, I didn't get that, or I didn't get that, it is settled at that point, and then an individual totally independent does the calculation from the accounts department, so that it is cross-checked before final payments are made, because somebody who is underpaid, I'm sure, will be back. Somebody who is overpaid, you may not be able to recover the funds from. And in the case I saw of errors in payment, overpayment or underpayment, they were not significant in the grand scheme of things, but could be depending on us not putting those type of controls in place. So one of the suggestions, the one you made, doing possibly a partial payment and then a final payment 2-3 months later on, which allows you to make all the necessary adjustments before someone is paid, is a commendable suggestion.
Right, thanks for that. In our case, the internal auditor does a review before payments are made. But in this case, I believe that what we're seeing here is a matter of timing, because the internal auditor would not have that information to his benefit as well when he is carrying out that audit. But I quite appreciate the suggestion about asking an officer to sign off on that final payment, because I don't believe that is something that we do. So certainly that is a recommendation for us to utilize.
Member Witter? You want to use a different mic?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam AG, my question was, part of it was raised by Member Holness. In your response in respect of overpayment, you said that will be recovered from retroactive due to the officer, and the short payment will be made accordingly. Have you notified the officer of the situation as it relates to what will be recovered from his or her retroactive? Because there could be a challenge at the end of the day. So have you notified them that there was an overpayment, we are going to recover it from your retroactive payment?
Okay,
have you done that?
Thanks for that, member. All overpayments have been recovered.
Pardon me?
All overpayments, all sums have been recovered.
Oh, it has been recovered
yes.
already? Okay, good.
All right, members, we're moving on. Are there any questions on 9.1? 10? Can we go to 10? Member Holness, you had a question on 10? No?
Well, I'm a bit concerned that persons could have been employed without their contracts being duly signed, but I also note the management response in terms of them having already taken the necessary steps. So.
Yes, so I want to highlight that the 3 contracts referenced were expired at the time of the audit, the audit exercise. So the contracts which were in place were actually duly signed by both parties. And let me explain what happened now with the 3 contracts. The impression may be given that I did not sign the contracts. I did sign the contracts. All contracts were signed by me. What the internal auditor is speaking to is not seen on the contract an acceptance by the person. And of course, this was the first time that we actually had the employment contract. So whilst it was not indicated on the contract, one officer had, in fact, submitted a letter, which I think we have referenced to say that I accept the terms. Another individual actually did not sign his contract saying that he actually accepted. He only signed that notification to say that I assume the position, etc., which was taken as his acceptance of the terms. However, since those 3 contracts, all contracts have on them now, for those that were in effect at the time and those that are current, my signature or the person empowered to sign on my behalf and the officer who assumed duties.
Member Sibley's.
May I recommend, Auditor General, it don't have to be accepted, but may I recommend that when there is recruitment and in the process in signing of contract, that persons who are given they are given the contract first to sign, that they accept, and then the organization signs after. You know, that would be meaning that is a mechanism to ensure, is a control that ensure that they signed.
Okay.
It is primarily what is done in the private sector. Mm-hmm. So the manager, HR officer, director does not really sign a contract before the individual being employed signs that contract and returns it. However, Member Sibley's, what I got was these were existing positions which their contracts were rolling over, and they would not have signed their contract at the point of rolling over in at least 2 of the cases. But it is something that is in the private sector commonly practiced. Your contract is not renewed until you have first signed that contract, because it commits you to the responsibilities and the obligations that you are signing on to.
All right, members, any other questions on that? Can we move to 10.1, the Performance Management Automated Appraisal System? Any questions on that? Okay, members, we are complete with the internal auditor's report. We are at 12:23. We haven't started the appropriations accounts, and we have 3 sets of appropriations accounts. We obviously cannot complete them today, but I would love if we could start, even though, or you want us to come back next week, members? Okay. Yes, Madam AG.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. No, yes. I've been attending Public Accounts Committee since 1997, save and except when I'm on vacation leave. I've never seen appropriation accounts being forwarded to a committee, so I don't have a template. I don't know what questions I need to prepare myself for so that we can have a productive meeting. So I need to have an idea of what.
Okay, Member Holness.
So, Chairman, I would suggest that we break next week and that we compile the questions we would ask, because it is also important that we're a bit more efficient in the process and ensure that Madam Auditor General is au fait with what concerns are, if any, as we do our reviews. It is really going to be, as it relates to any major variances one way or the other, it is like an analytical review in a way of major variances, either positive in terms of what one may perceive to be savings or underspend versus any significant over
and might I just hasten to add that if you look at the appropriation accounts for ministries, departments, and agencies, you will see that variances are not unusual. And there are myriads of reasons. But it would be good, as you say, to provide those questions so we can have an informed discussion.
All right, so members, what we're going to do, we're going to adjourn now. We're going to ask. We're not going to meet next week. We will prepare the questions to the Auditor General. So when we come back the week after, those questions can guide us. And we intend to do the 3 sets of accounts at the next meeting so that we can complete the review of the Auditor General's department. Okay? Can I have a motion for adjournment? So moved by Member Morrison, seconded by Member Holness. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
any Caribbean parliament till Jamaica in 2015. Why did I go that route? I knew that we had to look at the legal and the political. And so today I speak to my new draft petition, being brought in my name to the Judicial Committee Act of 1833. That Judicial Act will provide, and I quote from that act, to the King, "It shall be lawful for His Majesty to refer to the said Judicial Committee for hearing or consideration any such matters whatsoever as His Majesty shall think fit, and such committee shall thereupon hear or consider the same, and shall advise His Majesty thereon in the matter aforesaid." That is coming from the present body of luminaries that are working pro bono right now to prepare the petition in my name and to take it forward and ask the government and everyone else to join me in going for it now, not never. In that context, a key point of discussion during that meeting of April 14, 2021, was the formulation of the legal issues to be adjudicated. The proposed 4 legal issues to be advanced by the following. 1, whether holding people as chattel slaves under British rule was a crime against humanity. 2, whether slavery was a crime for which the government of the United Kingdom should be responsible. 3, whether the laws in Jamaica permitted slavery was unlawful, and whether there is a legal settlement or compensation. I've heard both presidents and prime ministers make their presentations. I said the time is now to make the decisions and to lead from the front. For now that the Jamaican political decision is made, it opens the door for Jamaica and the other Caribbean countries to take the matter to the International Court of Justice, to pursue reparation claims against all the countries who were involved in the slave trade for other forms of abuses as genocide, rape, murder, and the host of abused human rights under slavery. And therefore, the present legal team in my name are preparing the petition which will be taken to the Queen. In that team is, of course, the Honorable Frank Phipps, OJQC, Mr. Bert Samuels, and Mr. Ian Wilkinson. And I ask the government to join me in moving on, as and in the United Kingdom, Mr. Edward Fitzgerald, QC, English Bar, and Mr. Lawrence Cartier, another legal luminary, that are preparing that draft and that petition, and I'm asked them to try and make July the target to August to have that ready. So that examination is taking place, and I cannot thank them enough for having made that kind of effort as we prepare other issues to be addressed, as we decide to awaken the people to understand that the magnitude of the claim